Welcome to the week 3 go-to session. Thanks to everybody who is here tonight. We have a smaller turnout. Usually it's been like at least 10 people. Tonight it's only 4. I do apologize for last week. Remember last week I had to cancel because I was literally nauseous at the time of recording. Yeah, last weekend was a rough weekend. I had 2 health-related issues that happened. I'm not going to share them because why would I do that? But yeah, some serious things happened. But I'm better now, so I'm happy to be back. Happy to be with you live. We're here to discuss week 3. Hopefully, this will be a shorter session, though every time I say that, we end up going close to an hour anyway. But let's get rolling, okay? We have 2 brand new assignments this week, which is where I'm going to focus most of my attention. You can see my screen. We're in week 3 here. I'm grading your week 2 summaries right now. I've graded everyone's check your flow. That was the color coding assignments where you had to write a short reflection in addition. And now I've just started cracking the summaries. I have until Thursday to grade those, so please be patient. It takes me a while to get through all 3 classes, nearly 75 students. Okay, so welcome to week 3. Week 3 is different in a couple of ways. First of all, the main assignment for this week due on Sunday. We'll speak about that in a little bit, but this is another short essay. But here you get to finally weigh in. So if you've reached a point where you're like, okay, these summaries, they're fine, and I guess they're easy, but I'm a little bit tired of summarizing. Well, now you get to respond. Okay. Again, as I said in week 1, probably also in the week 2 lecture that I put up from last month because I was unable to give it live last week. I've mentioned time and again that I want to make sure that people read and thoroughly understand the 2 articles first, right? Because how can we respond to something unless we know its contents well? And I think I might have also gotten my soapbox and talked about the problem of there are too many people right now who are awesome at giving their knee-jerk reactions, but not so great about knowing things first. So first, you show me that you understand what the articles have to say. Now that you know both articles really well, you can begin to respond to them. If you look at week 3, it's much the same. You have another grammar check-in. Last week, I changed the week 2 quiz because someone told me that I'd said in week 1 that you get to take it up to 10 times. That turned out not to be true. I've changed it for week 2. I'm not changing it for week 3 because I want to try things out. Even though I haven't reset the week 3 quiz to allow you 10 attempts, I think it only gives you like 2 or 3. I believe you get an automatic 100 as soon as you take those 2 or 3 attempts. So I'm going to wait and hear back from students if that's true. I had a couple of students in week 2 say, can this be correct? Why am I getting 100? I don't think I did very well in those quizzes, but I think that's by design. I overheard a colleague who was explaining that in the past, yes, we gave people up to 10 attempts to try the grammar quiz, but students were still struggling. Some students weren't taking full use of those 10 attempts, and so they'd be stuck with a really low grade because either they just didn't want to keep trying or didn't care. So now it's, from my understanding, gimme points. In other words, you take the quizzes, you try your best, you try to learn from them, and I think you get rewarded with 100. I shouldn't say that because I guess people could just take them blindly and get the 100 anyway. Anyway, I'll figure out what's going on. Jessica says, did the quiz have to be done each week? Yeah, it's not. It doesn't have to be done each week. It's open until the end of the month. That's true. I'm just saying that because some people were jumping in and doing them. They were a little bit confused. I admit this is all super confusing. I have no idea why we created a quiz that's going to just give people automatic 100s. I guess we're not supposed to say that out loud and let the student go through the test a couple times thinking that it's important and then finding out as this nice surprise that it gives them a perfect 100 anyway. Um, who knows? We'll have to get that sorted out. But for now, if I'm correct about that, just enjoy the free 100s, okay? um, I don't know. I think that's kind of nice to know. But if that's not true, let me know, okay? Because I think it is, but I'm still figuring this out. Anyway, so yeah, get to the grammar when you can by the end of the month, February 2nd. But let's start talking about the 2 assignments that are different this week. Yeah, Jessica says the weekly grade was super bad because of the quiz, and she'd only taken it 2 times. Samuel says, I thought I was super smart when I got the 100. Yeah, take it, right? Take it. I do think it's silly. I shouldn't say this out loud, but yeah, I don't understand. Like, I guess I answered my own question earlier. If students don't know that it's going to lead to a perfect 100, they'll try anyway to do really well. But if they do know, and I think word can get around pretty quickly on among students, then what's the desire to even treat it seriously at all? You could, I guess, answer them all incorrectly and get 100. Anyway, take it, okay? Take it and run with it. So we have this activity that's due soon, Wednesday, right? Yeah, don't get confused. Not everything's due on Sunday. And this one requires a bit of effort. So some of you have probably noticed that I'm not the meanest person when it comes to late work. So if something comes in the following day, sometimes I take off the 5 points, sometimes I don't. Something comes in 3 days late, I'm supposed to take off 15 points, but sometimes I only take off 10. So try to get these things done by the due date, but I try to avoid penalizing students too harshly. Anyway, I'm going to try to explain this activity in the simplest way possible because it's a bit complex what it's asking for, but I'm going to reduce it to its simplest parts. You have 3 pairs of articles, one on cat leashing, which I didn't even know was a thing, people walking their cats on leashes. But I guess it is a thing, and I guess there's some controversy surrounding it, right? Like, here's one that says, yes, you should walk your cat. Here's one that kind of takes the opposite stance, that why would you leash your cat? Cats aren't like dogs. Cats do their own thing. And here's one about emojis, use of emojis, good or bad, social media. So it's kind of similar to what you've been doing so far, in that you've been reading pairs of articles, right? So if you chose a video game article in week 1, that one questioned whether video game addiction was really as serious as some people like the World Health Organization were making out. And then there was an article in week 2 with a couple of administrators in a school district who say that video game addiction is very real, and they actually send out information to parents about that issue. So here are 2 more pairs of kind of debate type topics. Don't confuse this though. Every month I get not many, but 1 or 2 students who think that these articles are the same as the articles they've been reading. And so in week 4, I get an article that addresses video games and cat leashing. And then I have to be the mean instructor and say, why in the world would we ask you to write on those 2 very different topics? So just understand that this activity is completely separate from what you're doing. This activity is designed to give you more practice in terms of not just summarizing something, but actually reading something with the same care that you did for the articles you've been reading so far, but also looking beyond just summary, okay? Actually looking at the content, looking at what the writer is saying and how the writer is saying it, and considering those things. So kind of like in week 1 where you had to write those 2 biography paragraphs, here you're also going to write 2 paragraphs. So it says, write a brief paragraph, 150 to 250 words, identifying the map in the first article. So if you choose the cat leash thing, you'd write a short paragraph, 150 to 250 words on this article, and then do the same for the second article. So you're writing 2 paragraphs, okay? 1 for each of the 2 articles. You're not reading all 6. You're just choosing one of these topics and reading both articles and writing a paragraph for each. Now, I in fact have some slides that get into what map means. I'm going to skip that though, because students always struggle and get confused because it is very esoteric, and I'm going to reduce it to its simplest thing, which is I've given you some thought questions or some thought prompts down here at the bottom. I think I'm the only instructor who has this, but here are the things you should consider. So if you choose to read the 2 cat leash articles, here are my suggestions. Examine the title. Sometimes the title is already telling you quite a bit. Okay? Is the author's main stance convincing? Why or why not? Remember in the summary, I said a summary is basically identifying the article's overall point or argument. So in that first video game article by Mark Lewis, his main claim is that video game addiction, it's not that it doesn't exist, but it is greatly exaggerated. That not that many people really suffer from video game addiction. So what is the main stance in yes, you should walk your cat? Well, maybe it's actually probably hinted at in the title, right? It's encouraging people to try to walk their cats, but other times it may not be that obvious from the title. And then I said for summarizing, it's about identifying what the overall stance or claim or thesis is, plus its 3 or 4 most important points that it makes throughout the rest of the article. So same thing here. Okay, so what's the main stance of the article, and is it convincing? Why or why not? So are you convinced that you should walk your cat or not? Read against the grain. By that I mean imagine that you're skeptical, that you're on the other side. So like my gut already tells me that cat leash walking your cat sounds a bit crazy, because dogs are lovable and they greet you when you walk in and they can't leave you alone. Cats, sometimes they want your attention and sometimes they don't. Or they want it for a while and then they will just get up out of nowhere and leave you. Like they don't care. They say, I'm doing what I want to do. Screw you. Yeah, petting me was nice for a while, but I'm tired of that. I'm going. Dogs will sit there forever. Like they'll never leave. They'll go without food. They'll go without water as long as you keep giving them attention. So yeah, so I have a little bit of a bias in the sense that walking a cat sounds a bit crazy to me. But when I read the article on yes, you should walk your cat, I'll take the opposite stance. Like I'll come into it with open mind. I'll say maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe that bias that I have is working against me. So you do the same thing when you reach each of the paired articles, which for whichever topic you choose. Try to come in with an open mind, or um, yeah, open mind, but also skeptical. Okay, or on the other side of the issue. Does that make sense? I know it sounded a little bit convoluted. In other words, try to, if you are a huge supporter of walking cats, imagine that you're not. Okay, does the article still work? That's what I'm trying to say. Other things to consider: what evidence does the author use? Right? Whatever evidence could the author use, but doesn't? Are there moments where the author's tone or voice isn't neutral? Okay, some articles are incredibly objective, others are voice driven, or others fold in personal anecdotes. In that video game article by Mark Lewis, I think he begins with a personal anecdote about his 2 children, who he had to rip away from the PlayStation. um, and then common issues to spot. Okay, is there ever information that's skewed by emotion? Is there any missing evidence? This can seem kind of hard to spot, but it isn't really, because if you've chosen a topic that speaks to you, like some of you maybe not don't care about cat leashes, so you won't choose this pair of articles. But maybe you are interested, at least semi-interested, in either the emoji question or social media will be a big one, right? Anti-social media, that's me, by the way, or a more positive article. And when you're reading, because you've chosen something that you are somewhat familiar with or interested in, you should sort of just feel intuitively like, wait a second, this person isn't addressing this. Okay. Evidence that's unbalanced. So they are providing evidence, but they're weighing one side more than the other. Again, that's something that a lot of you will be able to hopefully spot intuitively. You can just kind of tell when an author is not purposely cheating, but sort of stacking the deck. Um, any instances where opinion dominates, opinion can be great. But if it's all opinion driven, does that hurt the piece? Lack of acknowledgement of other views or the other side. Now, not all of these things are going to apply to your pair of articles, but my advice is to skip down here and start seeing um, which one of these do apply, okay? And use that to help you write your paragraph for each. So that's it. You're just going to write a paragraph on each of the 2 articles, and try your best to address some of this stuff, okay? Because at times I still get students writing more summaries than analyses, but I ask for a lot, but I don't always get it. Ultimately, I try to be. I think I'm an easy grader. I know there's some students who strongly disagree, but I think I'm the easiest grader in the department, because at the end of the day, I just want to read your writing and offer feedback. Um, and so, yeah, I'll push for you guys to try to address as much of this as you can. Um, but yeah, try not to write just pure summaries of the 2 articles, because you guys are experts at that now, writing summaries. try to weigh in. Okay, that's what we're doing. We're kind of preparing you for the main assignment this week, which is to start responding. Right. So if you can do that, just write a brief paragraph for each of the articles where you try to examine some of this stuff. You should be fine. And you have an example. Okay. Every assignment in this class comes with examples. So, I mean, the problem with the examples, you do have the links so you can read the articles if you want. I doubt any students do. And these paragraphs are pretty long. Like this looks way more than 150 words, and it's pretty well written and at a pretty high level. But still, if you want to, you can look at this to get a gist for what this person is addressing with these two articles if you're confused. And yeah, you should follow the advice here, right? So this is how you can arrange it: APA reference, paragraph, APA reference, the other paragraph. I think it says it's optional. Do I have that right? Yeah, so it says, note, while APA references are not part of the grade for this exercise, you are encouraged to practice creating references. So I'm not going to take off points if you don't have a reference or if the reference still isn't 100% correct. But do understand that this is another opportunity to try to create an APA reference for these articles if you want to. Okay, let's move on to the other assignment, because this is the kind of the big one that's due Sunday, the Speak Your Mind assignment. So let's take a look at that. So the good news is no more summarizing. Here you're going to choose one of the two articles you've read so far. Okay, now, not the articles that we just talked about. Again, I don't get many students who get this confusion, but I do have one or two every month. So you're not choosing cat leash articles or social media debate articles. It's the articles you've been summarizing these first 2 weeks. Okay, so you're going to choose one of them and essentially respond to it. Be in dialogue with it. Be in conversation with it. Okay. If I don't know if anybody here chose the Harry Potter articles, I think the week 1 article is probably better to choose, but you don't have to. I only say that because that first Harry Potter article has a pretty obvious claim that you can either agree with or disagree with, whether Harry Potter should be considered serious literature. Whereas the article for week 2, while it's interesting, I don't think has as much meatiness to it, but you can decide for yourselves. Okay. So you're going to choose one of those two articles that you've summarized to this point and essentially respond to it. Okay, it's going to be 400 to 500 words, so a bit longer than you've been writing so far. And you have to make sure that you're including these things. And I do have some recommendations on how to structure and organize the essay, but you do have to make sure that you're sharing your perspective on the topic, essentially whether you agree, disagree, or somewhere in between. Right? You have to be sure to include a point that the article leaves out or glosses over. And it needs to include at least one direct quote or paraphrase from the article. And I'm going to show how to do that. Okay. And then you get some tips. To formulate the best discussion in each paragraph, refer to the article first, then follow with your opinion. That's good advice, by the way. And when I share my suggestions for organizing the paper, I kind of structure it that way myself. Okay. And this other stuff is important too. Like, think of the author like a friend you're having a debate with, and don't hesitate to point out holes in their argument. Another way I like to describe this is lots of the stuff that you read online is in conversation with other stuff, right? If you've ever read an article that has like hyperlinks in it, sometimes it's just taking you to factual information, but sometimes it's folding in information from another article on the same topic. So someone's written an article on the state of, I don't know, higher education. And they might be writing that in response to another piece or two other pieces that they've also read and will refer to as they're writing their piece. So I sometimes tell students that, imagine you are writing your own piece. In this case, it's a response, yes, to this article that you've read. But you are in conversation with that article. And it's also being written for the general reader, okay? So that means that it should be completely understandable to a perfect stranger. Someone should be able to read your response and follow it. You have an example to study. So here's a response to an article called, "Let's Be Honest, America Dogs Are Parasites, Not Man's Best Friend." And the articles, I don't know how many of you look at the examples, but the examples can be really useful in terms of, like, here, he doesn't just dive right into the middle of things. No, he takes the time to explain that Chris Reed's article is intentionally polarizing from the very beginning. The title, Let's Be Honest, America, Dogs Are Parasites, Not Man's Best Friends, seeks to frustrate a dog-loving audience, and he succeeds. Can you see how this is already, like, even if you were just someone who walked off the street, you don't know anything about Chris Reed or this article he's written, the opening lines are written in such a way that you can follow along, right? It mentions an author's name. It mentions the name of the article. It even begins to define what the article is about. So you need to do the same thing, because I do see students who kind of like jump right into the middle of things because, well, they understand the article and they understand that I understand the article, and so they don't do any of the setup stuff. And I always encourage students, imagine that you're not you. Okay, imagine that you come across your paper that's been accidentally left behind, right? But you're not you. Some paper has been left behind by Jane Smith, or in this case, John Smith. Read your paper as if you're not you. Read your paper as if you're that complete stranger. Can you make sense out of what you've written? Would it make sense to that total stranger? If it isn't, then adjust and revise accordingly. Because you do have to hold the reader's hand. You have to explain things. For example, you have to mention an author's name. You have to give some sense of what the article is about. Right, that's what he does here. The article criticizes attentive dog owners and attempts to argue that the love and affection we give is lost on our dogs. Right, so he's taking the moment to explain what the article is about. So yeah, if you're, I'm going to give advice on like how to organize, bare bones advice, but still advice on how to structure the essay. But if you're still confused, or if the lectures aren't your best way of learning, well, you have an example to study. So just as this person begins this way, you try to do the same thing with your article. I mean, don't use exact language, but see if you can follow the general structure or advice. Okay. So yeah, you have an example. Okay, so let me get into the kind of specific advice here. I've got a little document planned. First, some notes on reading critically. By the way, this can also apply to the earlier task where you have to write those 2 separate paragraphs on those separate issues. Cat leashing, emojis, social media. But really, I created this for the response paper that's due Sunday. Okay, that you're going to write in response to one of the 2 articles you've summarized so far, which is now you're going to be reading critically. So some things you should consider: reading for gist. Okay, well, you should have done this for your summary. Actually, that's what a summary is. It's reducing the article to its gist, its overall main claim, and its 3 or 4 most important points. If it helps you, this part is kind of difficult, I know, because we're dealing with electronic media, but if you have a way to add notes to things online, or excuse me, on the screen, or take traditional notes, you can do so. Either literally taking notes or just noting in your head. Make sure that you're aware of what the main ideas, the most important ideas or examples are in the article. And again, you should have done this in the summary anyway. Look up words or references that you are not familiar with. Nowadays, that's a cinch, because you just highlight a word, throw it into Google, and boom, you get a definition. I do it all the time. Believe it or not, I do not know the meaning of every word. Sometimes I have to look things up, and I do. Take note of things that the writing makes you think about. If you haven't done this yet, because so far you've only been summarizing, read whichever article you choose to respond to. Give it a quick read, give it a quick look over, and try to identify the parts in it that make you think, or that you feel like you could respond to. And then, yes, think about where you agree or disagree and why. So I'm sorry to keep using the video game article, because I know not everybody chose that. You might have chosen the Netflix article, or you might have chosen the streaming music article. But the video game article by Mark Lewis, he claims that video game addiction is greatly exaggerated. It's certainly not a disorder. Do you agree with that overall claim or not? Why or why not? And then the examples and information he gives throughout the article, do you agree with those or disagree? Or why not? Okay, so yeah, it probably will require you to take another look at the article and try to spot moments you can respond to. Notice here that we're really talking about you being in conversation and not just reacting, but kind of analyzing. Again, this applies to the assignment that's due Wednesday, where you'll just write a paragraph each, but it also sort of applies to the main paper you're going to write for this Sunday. Really, it's about just pushing you beyond making broad, super general statements like I like, I don't like, or the author is totally right, or the author is totally wrong, or I don't get it, or I don't understand it, or the author is stupid, right? These sort of broad, easy takedowns or agreements. And the goal here is to push you towards more specific. So not just saying I like, I don't like, but I agree or disagree with the author because, and then followed by specific information. Instead of just saying the author is totally right, no, identify something very specific. The author supports his or her claim when she says X. The author is totally wrong, right? The author's point when she states such and such is not relevant because, in other words, specificity, pointing to actual very, very crystal clear moments in the article that you can point to versus just making sweeping broadsides. Okay. Same thing with I don't get it. What don't you get? Maybe there's a specific moment in the article where you could say the author's logic is confusing when she argues blank, or the author is muddled because she contradicts herself by saying such and such. Right? Point to those specific moments that are unclear or points that you agree with. And by the way, you can be in between, right? You might feel that Mark Lewis has some good points, but you're sort of in between. You think video game addiction is real and serious, but maybe not as serious as the World Health Organization claims, right? You can have, in other words, a more nuanced thesis. So here's a point where you can either take a screenshot or you can skip to this part of the lecture after the fact when I get the recording up. But here's like a very, very general structure to follow. So you'll have an introduction paragraph where you mention the author's name, the title of the article, describe what the article is about, just the gist, like a sentence or two. Right? Mark Lewis's article argues that video game addiction, while real, is not as frequent as people claim. Okay? Just something like that. And then make your main arguments or thesis clear. Your thesis being something to the effect of, you wouldn't state it this clumsily, but well, actually, you know what? I'm not going to take the time to write it. But basically, your thesis will make it clear that you agree, disagree, or somewhere in between. Again, I was going to literally type that, but that's not how you'll phrase things. You'll find a subtle way to state it. For example, in the example that you have, here's the thesis, right? It's long. Although he, the author, Chris Reed, tries to disguise his lack of argument by citing numerous sources of research, his argument weakens immensely when one considers the emotional dependence dogs have on humans, the thousands of years of evolution separating dogs from wolves, and the impossibility of Chris Reed to know exactly what a dog is or is not thinking. Now, this is a pretty accomplished thesis. I don't know if you can quite tell, but he's essentially disagreeing with the author. But not only is he disagreeing with the author, he lists 3 reasons why, right? His argument weakens when one considers A, the emotional dependence dogs have on humans, B, the thousands of years evolution separating dogs from wolves, and C, the impossibility of the author to know exactly what a dog is or is not thinking. And these become the 3 points that this writer builds upon. Now, if you want to create this sort of super ambitious thesis, you can certainly do so, right? I agree with Mark Lewis because of these 3 reasons. Or I disagree with Sarah Rainey's Harry Potter piece. Devote 1 paragraph at a time for each of those. If you don't create such an ambitious thesis, that's okay too. Just, again, have some sort of claim that ends your introduction that establishes what your overall take on the article is. And then just have 2 or 3 points you wish to make in response to the article. devoting one paragraph to each of your points. And notice that this matches the instructions, okay? Because that's what what the instructions are saying. Here, for instance, when it says to formulate the best discussion in each paragraph, refer to the article first, then follow with your opinion. In other words, find something in the article that you want to respond to. Make that clear from the beginning of the paragraph, and then speak about it. That's essentially what I'm pushing for here as well. Okay, so that means you should be able to spot 2 or 3 ideas in the article that you do want to respond to, and make those paragraphs. And then I had the reminder here: name one point that the article is not addressed or glosses over. If you're not familiar with the word gloss, that just means that it's mentioned, but more could have been said. And then finally, you'll write a short conclusion where you recap, using different words, your response to the article. Okay, any questions at this point? Is all this clear, more or less? I'm going to also take a sip from my coffee. I hope so. Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, it's really simple. Introduction. Point number 1 from article, followed by your response. By the way, I'm not really as bad of a typist. I hate the new Mac keyboards. I can't stand it. They are so shallow. If you've ever seen like one of those external cheapy keyboards that you can like plug into a tablet, that's what this keyboard feels like. I can't get any grip on these keys. It's awful. Conclusion. Okay, so this is a really stripped down version of the same thing. Okay, an introduction where you do this stuff. Mention the author, name of the article, what the article is about, and your stance. Point number 1 from the article, followed by your response. Point number 2, same thing. Point number 3, conclusion. So if you can do that, you'll be in pretty good shape. But this strategy, yes, of identifying a moment in the article and then responding is, I think, solid. Because some people dive immediately into response. And the problem is what I was mentioning earlier, that a perfect stranger off the street wouldn't be able to understand. So first you begin by naming something from the article and briefly explaining it. You even use a transition, like, for example, Mark Lewis argues X, and then explain what X is. Then you respond. Okay, so you set things up by first explaining that moment from the article before you respond. Now you have to have at least one direct quote or paraphrase. So let's talk about that. Okay, so I'm going to open up a new document, and I'm going to very quickly, I should have done this ahead of time, but this will be useful because you'll get to see me again use APA format. So we're going to be in Times New Roman 12 point, right? So we'll call this person Frank Smith, the student, even though nobody is named Frank anymore. We need to be double spaced, so we'll get that set up right now. What else are we supposed to put in the thing itself? Name, class, and assignment name. Okay. So English composition, and then it's actually 3.5. Speak your mind. And then centered, they have some sort of title. You can come up with your own unique title, but sometimes students just write a response to Mark Lewis's "Are video games really addictive?" Okay. By the way, the special capitalization rules for titles only applies to the references page. Anywhere else, if you actually use the title of the article, you capitalize all the main words. It's only on the references page that you have that goofy rule that you capitalize like you would a normal sentence. That's part of what makes APA confusing, is that it seems to be a whole bunch of different rules. Anyway, so this is where you can start typing your paper. I'm going to fill up a bunch of space just for the heck of it. I did this in week 1. I should have saved that document so I could jump right into it. Here, I'm going to fill up even more space. And I'm doing this to refresh your memories on APA layout rules, but also because I want to have some generic text. Oops. So I can pretend that we're dealing with an actual paragraph, and then I'll show you how to handle quotations. Okay, good. So actually, let me grab all of this. All right, so when we get to the end of a paragraph, we hit enter just once, hit tab to indent, and keep going. Keep going. Here, I'll put one more. Okay, we'll say that's the end of the essay. And then we'll center the word references. Okay, so let's imagine that in one of these previous paragraphs, this one is where you're going to put a quotation. So I'm going to show how to create an in-text citation. Because even though, yes, you could study the examples, right? You could look at the sample paper and find his, he's got a complicated one though. So that's why I want to show this in real time. Very few of you are going to be quoting a quote within the article, right? In other words, a quote not from the person who's writing the article, but the person who's writing the article uses a quote. I have no idea why we picked this paper. We should be showing one that has a traditional in-text citation. So I'm going to show you that right now. So I've got just randomly this article. Okay, it's the Why High Fidelity Streaming is the Audio Revolution Your Ears Have Been Waiting For by Oysen Lunny. Okay, and I'm just going to grab. You're not going to do that, of course. But let's say I wanted to quote this sentence right here. Okay. By the way, try to choose quotations that are under 40 words, because if they're longer than 40 words, you have to use a completely different format, and you guys shouldn't be choosing such long quotations because that's very, very long. You choose quotations that help support what you have. You don't just grab huge chunks because, oh wow, that's better than I ever could have said it, so I'm just going to take all of it and drop it into my paper. No, you choose significant quotations that help add to what you're saying. Okay, so I'm going to imagine that the sentence I just copied is one such sentence. Okay, so there's two ways you can handle it. One way is to mention the author's name in your actual sentence. So you could say something like Lunny states. Now, if you do mention the author's name, you immediately have to put the year in parentheses. It's just a rule. His name appears in the sentence, and you have to put the year. When was this written? 2019. Okay, so 2019. So Lunny states, comma, quotation mark, and I hate it when it does this. Okay, give me a second. Times New Roman 12 points, and it should be double spaced. Okay, it's hard to see, but this is, and it changed the color. You have to be careful of that too. So be careful when you copy and paste things over. Like it's in some weird gray color. Now it's correct. Okay, so Lunny 2019 states, comma, quote, the most significant developments have usually been at the behest of the large tech companies rather than the record companies. End quote. We're not done. Then we have to have a closing citation where we name which paragraph the quote appears in. So that appeared in paragraph 2. So we use the abbreviation para, P-A-R-A, lowercase, period, space, 2, and parentheses, period. The period does not appear at the end of the quotation. If you do that, then you have a bizarre next sentence that begins parentheses paragraph 2, you can start typing here. No. The period goes at the true end of the sentence, which is the citation, not the end of the line. Okay? And so you can see it more clearly. I'll highlight it. Okay? So author's name, immediately a year in parentheses, deliver the quote. When the quote is over, identify which page or paragraph number it's in. Now, you're all dealing with online articles, so it's going to be a paragraph. If this were a more traditional source that had page numbers, it would be like this. Page 24, let's say. But it's not. Okay. Now, you don't have to mention the author's name in the actual sentence. You could also just find your own natural way. For example, you could write something like, let me think of a transition to make sound quality improvements in sound quality have, quote, And by the way, this is a trick too. You don't have to take a full sentence. You can only grab what you need, right? Improvements in sound quality have, quote, usually been at the behest of largest tech companies rather than the record companies, end quote. And then at the very end, you put everything. Author's last name, comma, year, comma, paragraph 2, and parentheses, period. Here, let me highlight all of it, okay? So it's sort of like choose your own adventure. There are two ways to handle an in-text citation. Both are correct. And this can confuse students as well, because sometimes they'll mix forms. But can you see the logic of both of these? One uses the author's name in the actual sentence. The other one doesn't. The one that doesn't, you just put everything at the end in a single closing citation. Here, you split things up. Author's name, year goes in parentheses, and at the very end, the paragraph number. So choose whichever one feels right in the moment. Sometimes you'll just be able to tell, like, how important is it for me to mention the author's actual name? And like I said, you don't have to take full sentences. You can do things like this. Just use the portion of the sentence that you need in combination with your own wording to make a complete sentence that reads cleanly all the way through. Okay, so you have options. Now, the same exact rules apply to paraphrases. The truth is, I'd like to see you practice direct quotes. Paraphrases means you say things completely in your own words. Okay, so this exact same rules apply pretty much. So if you mention the author's name, again, you would put the year in parentheses as soon as it appears. So Lunny, that's the author's name, 2019. Points out that improvements have come from technology much more than from music companies themselves. A paraphrase means you're not using any language from the original. Okay, so you can't just change a word and call it a paraphrase. No, it means you're saying things completely in your own words. But because it comes from research, you're still giving credit. Okay, we're still attributing that it's Lunny who points out that improvements have come from technology more than the music companies themselves. Or you don't have to mention his name, right? Indeed, it has been pointed out that improvements have come from technology more than the music companies themselves. Here, you would put everything at the end. Lunny, year, but no page or paragraph number. Okay, if you're paraphrasing, you don't need this stuff. You only need this for the direct quote because you're identifying where that quote appears. That gets confusing too. Lots of students think that only a last name and year is needed for everything. No, that's only for paraphrases. So I wish we had like a document that showed this because, like I said, that's the only thing I don't like about our essay example is that it's so idiosyncratic, right? Budinsky, 1999, as cited and read. Most of you aren't going to have to produce a citation like this, and it's the only citation that appears in this example. So I don't know what to say except for skip ahead to this part of the lecture if you need a refresher on the citation. I'm worried about the people who don't watch lectures. But anyway, that's how you handle it. It really isn't that difficult. I know APA seems like it's a bunch of chaotic, random rules, but once you get it down, like I could do this in my sleep. Same thing for creating the reference, right? Whoever chose, we have anybody here who did the Lunny article? Lunny. Oh, where is it from? Where is it? January 18th. Okay. Okay, so 2019, January 18th. The month gets spelled out completely. And then the title has a long title, so I'm going to copy all that. Then I have to fix all that. That shouldn't be bolded. Yeah, when you copy things over, you got to fix all these mistakes that it makes. All this needs to be lowercase. Okay. by the way, we're nearing the end of the lecture, so if people have comments or questions, you can go ahead and ask them. I know it's not the most thrilling thing in the world to watch the instructor create references. Have been, probably would have been faster for me just to type this. Okay, waiting for. And then retrieved from. Again, I'm not this bad of a typist. It's just this keyboard is awful. Match destination formatting. I hate the hyperlink, so we'll get rid of that. This has been, and we have to take all the lines past the first one and indent them 1/2 inch. Boom. Oops. What happened to this guy? Huh. There we go. There we go. There's a reference done in real time. This article, the Lonnie one. Okay, if you don't have any questions, if you're clear with what we've gone over, you are free to go enjoy the rest of your night. I thank you so much for attending, but I'm going to hang out a little bit and answer questions if you have them. Hope the stuff made sense tonight. I felt like I wasn't explaining certain things as well as I could. And I really am worried about this in-text citation thing because it's so simple. You guys will get it because you're here and you've seen me do it in real time. But I'm worried about the people who don't watch the lectures. But anyway, there's APA. Simple, easy peasy. So questions, comments, either about this week, the assignments, anything related to the class as a whole, you can ask away. Thank you, Joshua. Sia says she wasn't able to find the reading on map. Yeah, see, I think you joined us a little bit late, so I would go back once I have the recording posted and watch. I actually simplified my explanation of that assignment. I didn't get into details about mapping. Rather, I just explained the article a bit more feelingly and pointed them to these prompts that I've given people. So I swear I'm not trying to pass the buck, but it's much simpler to point you to the first 10 minutes of the lecture or 15 minutes where I talk about this assignment. Really, I just encourage people to look at these prompts and see to what extent they could apply some of them to the whatever pair of readings that they chose. Okay. It looks like there aren't that many people asking questions, so I think I'm going to stop the recording now.